Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. So this is Hebrew from the very beginning, Book 2, Lesson 4. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with the homework assignment that we assigned you from last week's lesson. So the first sentence was, he closed the door before I came. Okay, so that one is, hu sagar et haderet lifnei shebati. Hu sagar et haderet lifnei shebati. So remember with lifnei, when we use lifnei, with a verb, right, we connect it with she, so that's probably a potential thing that some of you might have missed. Lifnei she bati, before is that I came. So that's unlike English grammar, right? Okay. Second sentence, she opened the door after that. That is, hi patcha et haderet acharei ze. Okay, there are other options for ways to translate after that. You could say achar kach, but with the words, acharei ze. We didn't say on the wall. לא אמרנו על הקיר. We said on the floor. אמרנו על הרצפה. And if you spelled this without the yod there, that's perfectly acceptable. That's actually a little more common now. The spelling of this word is more common without the yod, but it can also be written with the yod. Okay, and then the last English one. Why are there men on the roof of that building? למה יש גברים על גג הבניין ההוא? Okay, so there's two ways to do this one. The second option would be למה יש גברים על הגג של הבניין הזה? Okay, so you could do hahu or hazeh with either one. So basically the difference with hahu, hazeh just means this, right? If we say habinyan hazeh, it means this building. So the difference between hazeh and hahu is just like this and that in English. So if you have one that you're saying habinyan hazeh or habinyan hahu, so if you're pointing at the one that's further away, it would be that building versus this building. It's kind of the difference there with hahu or hazeh. So to say habinyan hahu is more like that building. But you could say this building, and it's not really going to be a problem. It's more, hahu is more important, like when you're comparing two, when you have this and that in the same sentence, or in the same context of what's going on. Okay, now for the Hebrew ones. ידעתם שיוחנן ושרה הולכים להתחתן? So did you know, ידעתם שיוחנן ושרה, that John and Sarah are going to get married? הולכים להתחתן. Okay, so this is a little bit colloquial here, right? We're saying going to get married. This is actually, but it is common, okay? So Israelis will talk like this to say someone is going to do something, basically just saying future tense, right? Because technically this could be just a future tense verb. We could just say, did you know that Jonathan and Sarah will get married, right? So we could use the future tense of להתחתן, but this is just a way to get that sentence done without knowing how to do future tense. Okay? And then, מתי הנשים באו לפה? When did the women come here? Right? So notice with באו, it has to have lepo. So you can't just say באו po. You have to say באו lepo. Okay, because lavo, right, to come, it's a directional thing, right? You're going from one place to another, come. So you would say come to here, not just come here. Okay, אני יכול לראות הרבה מהחלון בחדר שלי. And that one is I can see a lot from the window in my room. Right? And then הם אמרו שהחנות סגורה. They said the store is closed. So because you have this verb here, right, in the past tense, הם אמרו שהחנות סגורה, then in English, right, we would say was, right? They said the store was closed because it was past tense, so all your things in that sentence usually will be past tense. But in Hebrew, the skua is basically just functioning like an adjective, so it doesn't really matter. And because this is past tense, you understand that the whole sentence is past tense, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so those are the homework assignment sentences. Alright, so let's look at the words for this week. So I scrolled past them, sorry about that. Here we are. Okay, so the verbs are linhog, latzet, and linsoa. Okay, so linhog means to drive. Linhog is to drive. The present tense is noheg, right? Male, masculine would be noheg, feminine, nohegit. Nahag, right? Nahagti, I drove, we drove, nahagnu. Kamazman nahagta, that would be how much time did you drive? How long were you driving, right? Kamazman nahagta, to drive, is linhog. Okay, then we have latzet, which means to leave or to go out. Okay, so this is the verb. Literally, it's like to leave. It's used a lot like to go out, so even like to go on a date or something, to go out, or to go to town, that type of stuff. But also simply to leave. Anachnu yotzim, we're going out. Yeah, but because it can mean go out, like even just going on a date or something like that, you do kind of have to be careful how you use the verb. Sometimes you could be misunderstood with that one. Okay, and then linsoa. Linsoa is to travel. Okay, so this should be used anytime you're using a vehicle, basically, to go somewhere. Right? Lalechet is to go, but it also means to walk. Okay, so it could be confused with other things if you said, "Ani holech la'ir," I'm going to town. Holech ha'ira, it might be understood that you're walking to town. So you would want to say "Ani nosea," right? From the verb linsoa, you would want to say "Ani nosea ha'ira" if you're going by a car or a bus or whatever. Okay, so nosea. This one works like yodea, right? Because we have the ayin as the last root letter, ladat. So we have yodea and yodaat. So the feminine of nosea is nosaat. Yodea, yodaat, nosea, nosaat. Right? They're going to work the same because you have that same problematic letter on the end there, the ayin. Okay, and then we have nasa, would be past tense. So nasati. So example here with these. Okay, so yatsa in the past tense, when you're adding a suffix onto the end of one of these words, you don't hear the aleph or ayin, right? So yatsati, nasati, those are going to sound very similar. When you're looking at third-person forms, there's not a difference really when you add the hey, right, for the feminine, because you're already ending with a soft sound. So hu yatsa, the he yatsa. Okay, so it's really the same sound for how the word is pronounced, whether it's masculine or feminine. And the same with an ayin, nasa and nasa sound very similar. So just for me to write that out, what I'm saying here. So nasa would be the masculine, right? The feminine would be nasa. You add a hey, right, for the past tense. And then with ones that have the vav added, so nasa, and then they traveled would be hem nasu. So the ayin is not heard at all in that case, right? There's no vowel there. Nas, u. So the u vowel goes with the ayin. So nasu, they traveled. So those soft-sounding letters can be a little tricky when they're on the end of a pal verb once you go into the past tense forms, because you don't really hear the letter anymore. So it can be slightly harder to recognize sometimes. Nasa, nasa, nasu. And then nasati, nasanu, right? With yatsa, we would have, let's write out the third person forms would be yatsa, yatsa, and yatsu. Okay, so these verbs that we're looking at here, they're what we call like slightly irregular, right? They have a problematic letter, okay, a problem root letter, which in general those are the guttural ones, okay, so the soft sounds. So with letters like chet, ayin, aleph, and hey, especially those. There's some others that cause issues in certain cases, but those especially are considered problematic root letters, which will have certain little things that they'll do that aren't exactly standard, right? Like we know with an ayin on the end of a word is always pronounced ah, right? So this verb can't just be nosei, like these noheg, yotzei. This has to be nosea, right? You have to have the ah sound when you have an ayin on the end of a word. But then in this case, down here, once you get the vav added on the end, right? Once you get the vav added on the end, it goes to nasu, so you don't hear the ayin anymore. Because it's not the last letter in the word, it doesn't have to have that ah vowel. Okay, and then, so with nahag, linhog, to drive, this one is unusual with the hey, okay, so the hey is the middle root letter, and what that's going to do is cause a slightly more of a vowel with the other third person forms, okay, so you have nahag as this third person singular masculine, right, he drove, hu nahag, and then she drove is going to be he nahaga, okay, so the hey in the middle of a word like that, there would be usually a shva would be there, right? You would have a shva underneath whichever letter here in this case, right? So nasa, nasa, nasu, right? With stopping on that shva. But when you have a hey in the middle of a word, you can't really have a shva under a hey. Okay, and if you do, it is still going to be voiced a little bit. So you would still hear a little bit of a vowel with that hey. So what happens here is they actually will do see if I can find the right vowels. It's kind of rough sometimes to find. Vowels on here, they aren't marked. Keyboard, there we go. So it's this vowel here is what they'll use there. So it's basically a slightly short ah sound, a slightly shorter ah sound, and that's what that vowel represents. It should be a slightly shorter ah sound, but in a lot of cases you don't really hear a difference. So this is going to be nahaga, nahaga. So nahaga, nahag, nahaga, and then nahagu also. So that's why this one is unusual. With that hey as the middle root letter, you end up with those little bits of variations there. So another one that works just like this is ahav, right? You guys already know this root. Lehov is to love, to like. Ohev, ohevit. And we hear this concept a little bit even in the present tense, right? Ohev, ohevit, and then ohavim. Ohavim. Because usually in the present tense, right, when you go to the plurals, that second root letter gets a shva. You know what I'm talking about? Let me do an example. So like with choshev, and then when you go to the plural, it becomes choshvim, right? It's just two syllables. It ends up with a shva there under the sheen. Choshvim, two syllables still, right? Choshev, choshvim. But then when you're looking at a verb like ohev, it goes to ohavim. So you still end up, again, with that ah vowel, right? The short ah vowel with that one. So ohavim. Right. Ohev, ohavim. Choshev, choshvim, right? You can stop on the sheen, but not with the hey. And so the same concept happens with past tense. You have ahav, he liked, right? Who ahav, or he loved. He ahava, and him ahavu. Him ahavu et ha'ochel shehechanti lehem. They liked the food that I prepared for them. So that's why these verbs were selected for this thing, is just to kind of get a little more into some of the variations and the slight differences that happen with certain root letters in Pa'al past tense. Okay? So linhog, latzet, and linsoa. Another interesting thing with linsoa, with the word nosea, nosea can also just be the word for a passenger, right? So someone that travels is a passenger. So like at an airport or whatever, there might be signs that say L'chol hanosim, for all passengers, or something like that. When they're making announcements, they would say passengers on this flight, or travelers for this flight. So nosim. Nosim are travelers or passengers, just depending on the context of it. Also, another word that sounds very similar here, nahag, is the past tense form of to drive. A driver is a nehag. Okay, so with a shva there underneath, nehag is a driver. So hanehag nahag et hamechonit. Hanehag nahag b'mechonit. The driver drove the car. Nehag and nahag. Alright, so that covers the verbs in the lesson. Let's take a look at the nouns. First noun is autobus. You probably guessed, that's a bus. Auto, right, is the first word. Bus, autobus is a bus. So a bus driver would be a nehag autobus. Abba sheli hu nehag autobus. My dad is a bus driver. Lo bemet, not really. Okay, mechonit. Mechonit is a car. Mechonit. This is kind of interesting to note here. The root of mechonit is mem, kaf, and nun, which is actually a borrowed root from English. So if you notice, if we take that root in English, what word do we make? Machine. Okay, so there's several, the word machine in Hebrew is mechona, which they also borrowed the root from English, mechona, right? Or maybe Latin, I don't know specifically, but it's similar to the English. I don't know for sure where the root actually comes from, but they did borrow that. So we have mechona, which is a machine, and a mechonit, which is a car. Use that word machine, mechona, a lot in words like a washing machine, different stuff like that. We'll use that same word. Okay, so a mechonit is a car. Delek is the word for fuel or gas, depending on what you like to call it. Fuel is delek. Delek. Okay, then we have the word tachana. Tachana is a station. Tachana, a station. Okay, this is commonly used in a smichut. I think this might be covered here in a little bit. Okay, so tachana is commonly used in a smichut, right? That's where we connect two nouns together, if you're not familiar. So in the case like a fuel station, right? A gas station, we say tachanat delek. Tachanat delek. So if you're familiar with how smichut works, if the first word in the smichut, right, the first noun is feminine ending with hey, that hey will change to a tav, right, because we don't build on a hey on the end of a word, the hey has to change. So tachana changes to tachanat delek. And that just shows that the two nouns are connected, making up a different noun, right? So it's station gas, it's a gas station, tachanat delek. Tachanat delek, so like a bus station would be a tachanat autobus. Tachanat autobus. Okay, then we have the word for city here. Ir. Ir is a city. And then it's worth noting here because the plural is slightly unusual. The plural is arim. Okay, so ir and arim. Somewhat similar to bait and batim, right? You lose that yod there that's in the singular. Ir and bait both have the yod in the middle in the singular. And then when you go to the plural, it's just the a vowel and the yod is gone. Arim and batim. So those are somewhat similar in the way that they go to the plural form. A common word that is used in Hebrew is ha'ira. Ha'ira, which means toward the city, okay, or to the city. Ha'ira. So, like if you say I'm going to town, you say ani holech ha'ira, right? I mentioned that earlier. Ani noser ha'ira. This is a common thing we see with a hey added on the end of something. It shows movement toward something. It's the directional. Okay, so it would be the same thing as saying la'ir. You can say ha'ira, which is toward or to the city. La'ir would be to the city, right? It's the same thing. So there are just a few of these that are used a lot in modern Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, this was very common, okay, to just add a hey on the end of something to show direction or movement toward that thing, okay? So even with names of cities and stuff, in biblical Hebrew, you see that a whole lot. So like with the city Shechem or Shechem, you'll see Shechema, okay, so toward Shechem, or Yerushalayima, which is toward Jerusalem. So that hey added on the end can be a directional thing, just showing movement toward something. In modern Hebrew, there aren't a whole lot of those that are still used. They use it for like up, down, to the right, to the left, and then for directions south, east, north, and west, like when they're saying westward, right, to the west. And then like with homeward, habaita, and ha'ira, to the city. Other than that, it's not used a lot in modern Hebrew, so it's mostly just used with those set specific ones that we use all the time, because we're always saying things like, to the west, or like westbound, or whatever, those types of words. So they carried over even into use in modern Hebrew with those specific ones, but it's not used just daily, with anything. Okay, then we have the word aretz, or eretz. Usually it's eretz when it's standing alone, eretz, and then when you have a bet on the front, ba'aretz, or the land would be ha'aretz. So eretz, sometimes aretz. When an Israeli says ha'aretz, they usually mean Israel, right? The land. Eretz can mean land. It can also mean a country, okay? It can mean a country or land. Only a country as in like Israel or Italy, something like that. Not country as in like someone who lives in the country, as in not in the city. It's not used that way. It only means like a country. And it can also just mean land. So like in biblical Hebrew especially, it's used a lot just to mean land. When God created the dry land, it says aretz, eretz. Okay, the plural is artzot, so eretz is a feminine word. In the plural, it's artzot. And that's where we get the word artzot habrit. If you're familiar with the word brit, maybe. Brit HaHadashah is the new covenant. Brit HaHadashah, that's how you say the New Testament in Hebrew. So artzot habrit is lands, right? Plural of land, right? Lands of habrit, of the covenant. So it's lands that have a covenant together. This is what they use. This is the term that's used for the United States of America. So lands that all have a covenant together, right? Artzot habrit. That's how they say United States. They even have an acronym, like we say USA. They'll sometimes just say Arav. Arav, so that's just a shortened form. Artzot habrit, right? So it's just taking some of those starting letters, right? Ar and Hav, Brit, and they put these Girshaim, they're called the Girshaim. So Gerish is one of these marks, an apostrophe. Girshaim, two of them, and then they just say Arav. So those marks just show that all of the letters are not there, that it's shortened. Basically, that's how you can recognize, oh, it's an acronym. In Hebrew is when you see those two little marks there between letters. Another one that you might be familiar with, you probably would recognize what it sounds like. You might not recognize it when you see it. But Tanakh is also an acronym. The Tanakh, that's what they use to refer to the Old Testament, the Bible, right? Tanakh is Tav, which stands for Torah, Nun, which stands for Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Kaf on the end, which stands for Ketuvim, the writings. So they just take the first letter of each of those words, put them together, put some vowels with it, Tanakh. Tanakh. So that's how acronyms are written in Hebrew. Okay, and then the last of the nouns on the list in lesson 4 is Rehov. Rehov is the word for a street or a road. Rehov. Rehov is a masculine word. Okay, it's masculine grammatically. but in the plural it ends with ot. Okay, so it's unusual in that sense. Rechov and then rechovot. Rechov and rechovot. Rechovot. Hu mistovev berechovot ha'ir. He's hanging out in the city streets. Good question from Lockwood. Does delik have anything to do with the word lehadlik, to light? Yes, it does. It's the exact same root, right? So lehadlik means to light something. Basically, you can't light something if you don't have fuel, right? You don't have something to burn. So delik is the thing that gets nidlak, it gets burnt, right? Or lit. Lehadlik is to light. Delik is fuel. So yes, in one sense, it can be any type of fuel, even just fueling a fire, putting fuel on it, something that burns. Okay, and then the last words from the lesson are mukdam, which means early, mukdam, and meuchar, which means late, or later, sorry. Well, not always later, yeah, late. It can mean later, but usually when it means later, they'll put yoter with it. Okay, mukdam is early. So mukdam baboker would be early in the morning. Meuchar balayla, late at night. Meuchar hu tamid magia meuchar. He always arrives late. You notice meuchar, this comes from the same root as achare. Achare is after, right? Or achar, the word with achar hatzoraim, noon, right? Afternoon. Achar hatzoraim, so that's the same root. Meuchar, which is late. Achare, which means after, so you can see why those would be related. You come late, you come afterward. Mukdam means early. You might be familiar with the word kedem in biblical Hebrew, which is like first or old, ancient. It also means east in biblical Hebrew, kedem. So that root has relationship there. And then we have Yehudi, which is the word for Jewish. Right? Or it could also be a Jew, right? So a person that is Yehudi. Hu Yehudi. He is a Jew, or that could be he is Jewish, right? Hu Yehudi. It would be the same thing in Hebrew. Okay. I believe that's everything from lesson 4. Were there any questions? Okay, in a video I saw once, a guy said, as part of an excuse, Savta shali yoled b'yom Shabbat. This seems to say my grandmother gives birth on Shabbat, but seems unlikely. And this some sort of an expression in Hebrew, or just a mistake? It's probably some sort of an expression. I'm actually not familiar with the expression. It does seem like I might have heard it before. I can't remember like a meaning that it would have. Subtitles translated it literally. Yeah, so it's probably an expression. Yeah, an excuse. It sounds like it would be that type of thing. But yeah, I'm not positive on that, sadly. I have to ask a native Israeli. Alright, any other questions? Okay, well, questions come up, you can always send me an email. I'll see you guys next week. Shavua tov, להתראות.